101. Let us introduce to each other, or could you introduce yourselves? We'll start over here.
We're just introducing ourselves, if you don't mind.
And wonderful. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Janine. This is also being recorded for the purposes of being archived on our website, and so this is a busy season, we know. Thank you to those of you who are here, because it's Thanksgiving in a couple of days, so having this available to review after you have your Thanksgiving dinner and you want to watch something, you're like struggling to figure out what to watch, this is available. We also have this being recorded or produced as a Facebook Live chat, so we do have community members, hopefully, who were not able to attend but are able to send us their questions if, as we go through the presentation. So I'm Valerie Henning-Piedmont, Superintendent of Hastings, and
I'm Maureen Carvalho, the business official of Hastings.
Both Maureen and I have had experience with running these what's called Budget 101s, which are really important background information that is not necessarily shared during the actual budget presentations that are done starting in February, that are traditionally done in every district in New York State in February, because we follow a state mandated calendar that Maureen will talk about a little bit. So it's not the time to really sort of get into some of these basics, and so the essentials of the school budget development is really important. And actually, I updated this presentation, so I'm not sure if it really does reflect what's here, because I did do some updates. Okay. So we might have to do a little modification, because I noticed the word that I changed, basics, is not there. So if we were able to, I'm not sure, Patrick, if you have the slides. I was working off of the slides, so if someone PDF'd them, you missed the revisions that I made about 10 minutes ago.
I shared them with them.
Okay, we'll go through that. We'll make the adjustment. Yeah. So anyway, these presentations are so important because they do provide some very, very important background information. One of the, and we have 3 of these sessions. This is the first one. The second one is going to be next month, which is December 9th, and then the final one will be January 21st, and all of those are here in the Lloyd Library. So why are we doing this? As I mentioned earlier, it's really to provide some basic information that's helpful to our public, our community that we rely upon for the resources that make our schools function and operate. And obviously, no one wants to really talk about school budgets because they're not the most sort of exciting parts of the school district. But the school district can't do what it desires to do in service to children if it does not have a school budget. And the budget is the embodiment of the district's beliefs and values. So everything that we believe in is embedded, in the school budget. We cannot operationalize a vision without setting forth a budget that supports that. And obviously, the district's visions and beliefs are shaped by what the community desires and believes in for all of its children. The way in which we started that conversation this year was through the development of the board's objectives, which I pulled out here, and then the superintendent, or my goals. And those board objectives are pretty broad around sort of the areas of the school system that really do make possible all of the goals and the visions of what we believe in with regards to student learning. So leadership and organization being very important. The stability of the district, all the roles and processes And all the structures are very, very important in terms of ensuring the future that we believe we want for all of our children. Fiscal accountability of facilities, this is part of that whole process of making sure that we have a long-term, and we're invested in the long-term health of the system, and all the needs, and obviously what we believe to be the desires and goals of the public when, with regards to, in the community, with regards to the education that's provided for children here. Another very important board objective is teaching and learning objective, which again is the embodiment of this notion of what happens here in terms of teaching and learning, and this notion of ensuring that we are, both supporting those processes and identifying those that serve that long-term objective. And finally, community engagement is extremely important. This is one of the activities that supports student or community engagement, this ability for us to engage with our public so that we are shaping and helping them to understand all the key issues around facilities, around the budget itself, policies, and that we deepen an understanding in the community about how important all the work that takes place is to serving ultimately the needs of our children.
Oh, you have this one here, Valerie.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, we will shift gears with the presentation because there's another important slide, and it has to do with skills for college and careers in life. Yes, this is a phenomenal school district, and we have great teachers, and we've met, Ms. Szymanski and I, who are the newest people in the school district, have met some amazing students. And we want those amazing students, as do all of our parents, to be prepared not only for the things that they have to, achieve and do well in terms of, their classes, dedicating their time as learners, passing various tests, AP tests or exams and state assessments. We also want them to be prepared in terms of the world of work. So what's out there for them in terms of the skills for college and careers and life. We've spent some time throughout the district reading something called The Future of Jobs, which is a publication from the World Economic Forum, which is one of them among many that give us a forecast with regards to some of the essential skills that young people are going to need that are just beyond what content they're currently learning now. So, for example, adaptability is one of those key skills, and it isn't, that you only talk about adaptability in a certain content area. You talk about it universally in every, facet of the child's life, in curriculum, in assessment, in instruction, in the learning environment, professional learning and assessment. So adaptability has to do with the student's ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Very important skills. And that sense of, that students have to have with regards to learning something new and approaching that from the standpoint of being confident about that. Resilience is another important skill that no matter what you read, the futurists are talking about that as being a very essential skill with regards to being able to work through and bounce back and kind of keep going and have this growth mindset. Creativity is an essential skill that sort of bubbles up to the top. Critical and analytical thinking is another one. Complex problem solving. Social emotional agility, that ability to kind of balance and work well in different contexts and be able to regulate your emotions and figure out what's driving you and then applying something to help make sure that your decision making is appropriate. And there are a lot of examples that lots of districts are using, including ours, that we really are educating children with regards to what it means to be socially emotionally intelligent. Social influence and leadership is another important skill. And then global and cultural competence is a key skill that, as I said, transcends the experiences that students have here in school. And it's our responsibility to think about how we integrate those skills across the experience of the learner. And that's part of the sort of texture of what goes into development of a budget. It's philosophy, it's what is happening here and now, but it's also that world that young people are going to have to prepare themselves for, that we are going to have to prepare them to be successful in once they leave here and graduate and go on to college or to work first, whatever that order is. There's no sort of perfect order, but the ability to kind of manage all of that in ways that they feel comfortable and that they feel confident that they were prepared here to be able to do that.
Okay, so next up, we're going to speak a little bit about the budget development calendar. The budget really is a year-long process. I mean, it formally begins in October, but it really is something that we're not even ending one school year and we're already thinking about the year after, and we always look at things in like 5-year increments in terms of just how we develop and how, as we're thinking of decisions we're making, it's constantly part of the work that goes on. But in terms of our formal process begins in October, and at that point we are sending out information to the buildings and having conversations with the various program leaders, principals and directors, and they're looking at what they're currently doing, evaluating their programs, and they're then thinking about what their needs may be for the following school year. There's a lot of different things that we're also looking at each year. We have our mandates, which are all of the things. We have debt, we have our utility costs, just running any business. We're required to operate and maintain our buildings. We're required to carry insurance, preserve our property. And one of the big things that drives, some of the decision-making is always thinking about the health and safety of our students and staff. That's always on the forefront as we're thinking about decisions around our, how we're planning on doing different work around the school building and planning on how we're going to afford to do it. Of course, as part of the budget development, we have our contractual obligations. 81% of our costs in our budget is all to do with our staff for both salaries and both benefits, and that we are a people-centered business, and the majority of our cost is in the people that serve the organization. And then, of course, the other items are like utilities and insurance and things such as that. As we're developing the budget, we are looking at the staff we have currently, and we move them over to next year and what the costs around their contracts will be. And then we also wait for some external information that really helps us as we're developing our budget. And the big items in that category are our health insurance costs. So health insurance, as many people can appreciate, is very costly, and similar here, we've seen a lot of spikes in the last few years in the cost of health insurance, and that's a big driver as we wait to, as we're putting together our budget for the following year, and also our retirement contributions for both, for all of our employees. And these are controlled by the state, and they are based upon the performance of the funds over the 5 years previous, and we get those numbers, and that is a big piece, and when we're understanding what our next year's budget will look like.
The budget development calendar was board approved?
Yeah, so the board, the official calendar, and it's really tied to the legal mandate, so that was board approved on November 4th, and it lays out the dates of both our presentations to the public and also the budget hearings and things that are required by law. The official, the board will be adopting the budget April 21st. By that point, they'll have to move a budget forward to go onto the ballot for the community vote, and the community vote is May 19th. And again, these dates are all based upon our legal calendar in New York State and when we're required to have our budget vote. Yes. Sure. Sure.
So when you mentioned like the health insurance,
yes.
I know it's a big expense. Is it just insuring the teachers here, or the teachers here part of a larger insurance pool that offers some?
Yes.
We're going to get into that. So if you'd hold for a couple slides.
Yeah, and then Steve, I'll speak to the insurance, and I'll speak to give you some sense of the cost and some things we have tried to do to keep that cost down. But that's a good question. Thank you.
Sure. In terms of community expectations, and not only community expectations, but values, class size is an important, sort of way in which those values are actualized. We believe in keeping class sizes down, and so you'll see a couple of slides later on within the presentation that show that. Now, while there are fluctuations, there's also the desire to make sure, that we don't go over a certain class size when it comes to certainly our early grades, kindergarten through 4th grade, but throughout. And so you'll see that in some of the charts that are coming a little later on. Again, we mentioned academic and social emotional programs, whether those are programs that have, such as Ruler, which is a social emotional program developed by Dr. Mark Brackett out of Yale University. Lots of school districts in the region have subscribed to that as a model that would be considered tier 1. That all children at a certain grade level would be exposed to the learnings associated with Ruler, and that teachers would be, and as well as school counselors would be involved in supporting children. So you'll see those as being an embodiment of the belief systems in the school district. Least restrictive and inclusive, also very, very important philosophies and concepts that I think the district holds in high regard. This notion of making sure that students with IEPs are in least restrictive learning environments, that they are with their grade level peers, that they're spending time with students in the same grade, learning the same content, but obviously we're honoring the skills that are part of the child's individual educational plan. And being inclusive, making sure that it's an environment that's very inviting and warm, and that children feel a sense of belonging here. And there are also many, many ways in which that's operationalized. The arts and music are very important to the community. That goes without saying. If you were here for a couple of the performing arts, the plays, which were marvelous, and all of the fact that we have a very rich arts curriculum and program and an investment in staff, again, communicates the value around those. Athletics is also a major part of the experience of children, and it's not just being a part of a sport, but all the skills that I mentioned earlier with regards to the workplace skills, that once children leave us and go on to college, careers, and life, they're going to need those skills, and they practice those in athletics as well. And the electives are so, so important. That's where children develop a passion for something, explore. They get a chance to sort of see, what it's like. A parent sent us an email about a child who got interested in photography and used his summer money to purchase, a camera, and then has been, dabbling in that through an elective offered here. So it's very, very important for, us to sort of keep that list of electives, rich and to shape them around, student interests. The alternative program, the high school alternative program, is a wonderful, wonderful program that is for a group of children for whom the traditional high school setting doesn't necessarily fit. It's fit their needs or where they are right now as students. They get the same exposure to the high school curriculum, but at a different pace. So there are different ways to sort of get through the high school, and this program is really, really essential to making sure that that happens. And obviously security and safety, we don't have to say a whole lot about that, but the cameras and having security at the front door is a way of life in the 21st century, and we're obviously looking at making sure that we adhere to not only what's happening around us. We have a safety consultant who works with the district to make sure that we are following suit, and we're using the structures that are in place across districts in the state to make to ensure that we are doing exactly what we need to do, and we are modifying and analyzing the plan regularly just to make sure that we have we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's.
And I would say that not only is that a community expectation, but that is definitely a mandate from the state of New York. So even in terms of that, the state takes that very seriously and actually has even come in audited districts in terms of making sure that the highest safety and security are being adhered to. So I think it's definitely our expectation, but it was something that, if not, it would, there's a lot of mandates.
If we weren't, right, if we weren't on top of it, the state is.
Right, in terms of having the consultant and things that they want to ensure that all those most updated safety procedures are being practiced here in the district. So that's extremely important to us. Do you want me to speak to this, or?
I'll continue.
Okay, yeah,
we toggle here.
Yep, that's what I figured.
In terms of the annual budget goals, we want to preserve our core programs and resources, all those things I mentioned before. We want to hold on to those and enrich in those and make sure that they're available, as sort of a legacy to, to the desires of the community, but also those things that keep our children happy. And when they walk into the building, we want their buildings and their classrooms. We want them to smile and feel, that they are, in a place that's going to nurture and grow them as learners. So preserving is very important. Expanding the learning experiences. So if we find out that there's something else that our students need, whether it's a balanced literacy program, whether it's it's a math, curriculum resource. As we look at our student data, as we look around us, as we look at trends, as we understand the skills that students are going to need to be successful in life, we have to make sure we're matching that, we're benchmarking, and we're aligning all of that. So that's very, very important to us. We want our teachers to be, make recommendations about, programs or opportunities, and we want to be able to introduce those. So we want the budget to be able to support that. Investing in our professional learning. Part of Ms. Szymanski's responsibility is to make sure that there is an ongoing professional learning committee that supports the learning of all of the employees in the system, not just our educators, but the non-instructional members of our community, and that all adults, have to be engaged in ongoing learning. Our work is not work that it's sort of routinized and it doesn't require any problem solving. It absolutely does, and so this is in recognition that we do need to make sure that we are continuously growing and developing as leaders of the learning in the system, and also models for students. Maintaining the facilities. Maybe you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, so not only every year do we have some priorities, and there's a budget to maintain our facilities on a yearly basis. Then in addition to that, we do issue bonds from time to time to address some larger scale capital improvements that are needed at probably every 5 to 7 years. There's some larger type initiative put forth, but this is extremely important because not only, as Valerie said, it's important, it creates a nice environment for everyone in the system, both the students as well as the staff members, but it's also, just like in your home, if you neglect, taking care of your facilities, there's larger issues that you can end up being more costly to the district. So we do have a 5-year plan that we're constantly updating, evaluating, reprioritizing, and make recommendations to address different things based upon needs in each budget, as well as long-term planning.
And you'll hit that next one.
Sure. And then as far as to build a sustainable budget, I think this is something that I think we all in the district understand that we have a very supportive community, and we understand that a lot of the tax burden does fall on our taxpayers here, and we're constantly looking and making sure that anything that we do think about adding to the budget, that it's also sustainable, because you can't just look at what's going to happen in the following year. You want to make sure that we're building the capacity to afford to keep things, as Valerie had mentioned. We have many things that we hold dear to us, and we want to preserve those core programs. So as we're thinking of new things we want to introduce, we want to find ways to be able to either think of other things that we may not need as much, and to ensure that things are sustainable here, because we understand that the community can only bear so much, and we do keep that in mind as we're creating our budget.
So what you'll hear next is just basically an overview. This really represents the kinds of major budget factors, and that are sort of woven throughout the 3 presentations that we're doing, which are essential, and it's a reason why decisions are made as they're made across the state. So the other 699 school districts in New York State also have to sort of honor these factors as each budget is being developed. So you'll hear in the next few slides about collective bargaining agreements. We'll go much more deeply in the second budget presentation, which will get into some trends, and contract trends. Maureen will talk about the role of annual step increases and schedule increases, which is sort of the mechanism or the framework that governs how teachers and administrators and others who are on a salary step or schedule actually travel across that schedule. Pensions, both the employee retirement system, which is for the non-instructional members of the district, as well as the educators, meaning the certificated in both teachers and administrators. Those folks all contribute to and are part of the teachers' retirement system. And Maureen will talk about something fairly significant that happened last year that never happened before, that really kind of helps us out a bit. And FICA, Maureen will talk about that, the role of Social Security and Medicare, which are always there, workman's comp, health care, and other parts of the union welfare benefits, like dental and optical and so forth.
So would you want me to?
Again, yeah, just an emphasis on class size. And the reason that's important is, certainly with services such as, with students with IEPs, with the individualized educational plans, or students whose first language is not English, we really have to pay close attention to making sure that we honor the mandates, which also drive us to consider whether or not certain classes may be too large, because we want to make sure that all the students' needs are met in the class, and we also want to make sure that teachers are comfortable and have a sense of efficacy in educating children. So we have to make sure, especially with regards to the mandated services of children, the class size does matter. And in certain classes, it may mean that if another child comes into the class, we might have to then employ another educator. So it does matter tremendously. It's not universal all the time in every case, but it does become an issue with school districts, and we have to plan the budget with that in mind, that at some point during the school year, there is a potential for the need for an additional educator that we didn't start out the school year with.
That actually happened last year. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just as Valerie just mentioned, as we look, there's different cut points for different, there's some, that are just general class sizes that may be tied to community expectation, but as far as children with IEPs, in last year's budget, we did end up having to increase some staffing, because in terms of the makeup of the classes cannot really exceed certain percentages, and there's things that are, you're not allowed to exceed. You're not actually allowed to, but in terms of like best practice, but even in terms of there's sometimes mandated reasons that we need to, like Valerie had mentioned, either add another educator to that classroom, and those are things that sometimes we, can kind of come on to like unexpectedly, where you get an additional child. To your point, it could be one child or two children that actually could in fact require a full-time teacher to be hired.
And a lot of I don't say a lot of what Maureen spends her time doing, but she does look at this, and it's and tries to make sure that the budget is, has the ability for us to bring back children who are placed in other, services or other, communities, because we don't have the service here, and that's part of fulfilling, our obligation, under providing the least restrictive learning environment, that we want to educate all of our children, whether they have an IEP or not, in the school district with their peers. And while there are, services that may be offered through BOCES or through other school districts that, we can either tuition a student in if we have the program, or if we don't have a program here, the child may go to another school district. We prefer that they not go to the other school district, and when that happens, it means that we might have to increase staffing to ensure the success of that child. So being in that other environment, so it may be a temporary solution until we can build up the staff over time, so that we can have every child being in classes with their grade level peers, and in making sure that they are they feel comfortable, and also feel a sense that that they are being able to obtain the skills and achieve at levels that that support them and that prepare them for the a same world that all children are going to have to accept and be able to function and operate in successfully.
So then again, like Valerie said, that we're just kind of going over again, reminding you that the major kind of things that really drive our budget. And when we get into some further slides, and I'll give you some examples of where the pension costs have been historically and where they've been the last few years, and you can see how significant a change in that percentage is to the district. And in terms of our planning, again, just health insurance increases, it'll be, as we get to that slide, we'll speak a little bit more about what that means, and what some of those increases have meant for us, and how that affects our budget. Again, the state and federal mandates, many things are state and federally mandated, but even without those, I think I mentioned this to safety and security, because I think many districts would do some of it regardless of that. But in addition to that, we are required to comply with those things, so that there are things within our operation that are driven, and there's expense driven by that, whether it be busing and different things like that. Not to say we wouldn't do it, but much of it is dictated by regulation, and that we do comply with, and then we're required to fund that appropriately.
The other part of that, which we've been dealing with quite extensively this summer, and Ms. Szymanski's been spending a lot of her time in this area of ensuring that the Every Student Succeeds Act is, part of, how we operate, and in doing so, it's a huge emphasis is placed on equity for students, this notion of access for students, that all students should have access to much more rigorous course taking, regardless of whether you have an IEP or if English is not your first language. The other component of that, as I said, is the access part. Being able to not have your IEP or your services associated with your second language be an obstacle for you gaining access to other coursework. And then the other part of ESSA has to do with this notion of growth, that students have to make growth, there's a lot of data, regardless of what our sort of feelings might be about state testing, but it's another way for us to look more deeply at, where are there pockets of students who are not making growth, that's aligned with their grade level, peers. And we have to address that, and so that's part of the budget, and sometimes those things are happening. Unfortunately, we don't get that data until July. So budget season is over, at that point, and so we have to make sure that, we can, make provisions to provide for students so that, in the event, there may be a group of students or some students who might not be where they are in terms of that growth. So whether it means that there's some professional learning that teachers say they'd rather have that will help them to better differentiate the content and that they're teaching children, whether it's an opportunity to look more closely at how children gain access to their courses through the schedule. So there are any number of sort of steps or actions that we have to take as a result of looking at those data that are part of the ESSA mandate.
Yeah, and I think that goes, not to hang up too much on this point, but when I had spoken earlier and saying that, although the budget there's a formal budget process and a formal budget timeline, to Valerie's point, we are a living organization, and we do set up our budget based upon the set of facts we have before us at the time, which is very early in March, and create a spending plan for the next year. But to Valerie's point, we are, occasionally people will see us kind of either, make some things we have to switch around sometimes. So if there's a need that shows itself to exist, we have to have the capacity, and that's why the budget is always evolving and growing and changing, and we either have to reprioritize or maybe change some of the things we thought we would be able to do to either address something else. So we do have a spending plan, and within that spending plan, sometimes we do make tweaks, and it's a constant evolving budget, which is sometimes modified during the course of the year to address other issues that may come up, and then those would obviously push forward to our next year's planning.
Absolutely.
So, and then just the capital projects and debt, and we'll get more into this at a future meeting, and we'll kind of speak to how that's part of our budget, and how those things come to be, and the rationale for why issuing debt at times makes sense because of the ability not only to repay, but the way the state partners in that process with us. So yes, see, yep, sure.
Which meeting will you be addressing capital projects?
You mean in terms of the new one that we're going to be speaking about? So I think that'll be an ongoing conversation. The board at the upcoming December 2nd meeting will be adopting a resolution.
That's the time to come on December 2nd.
Yes.
Will you be discussing that here? Or just
not necessarily. These are sort of like, the basics of school budgeting. So we want to really make sure we spend time on that. We've had at each board meeting, we allocate time to talk about the construction bond. So as Maureen mentioned, we'll be, speaking very, at greater depth at the December 2nd meeting, and I think probably the next two.
One, yeah. I think it's almost every week we have something
week
on there. I mean, I think at different times, depending upon what's going on, there'll be some meetings a little bit heavier, a little bit more presentation, and some that'll just be more of an update. So this infographic just kind of really demonstrates the challenges in balancing a school budget, and we've spoken a lot about what goes into our expenses into that, and the major component being our salaries and benefits. Again, just as I mentioned earlier, that takes up 81% of our spending is just dedicated to paying our employees and their associated benefits. And then curriculum instruction speaks to either, you have we have some consultants, we have some, Valerie had mentioned, professional learning that we send our employees out to, or we have people come in.
Curriculum resources.
Correct. All those kind of things are in there. And although the actual dollar amount spent in that area is not significant, it's just a really important component that, of course, is something that we always have to plan for in each year's budget. Another big driver of our budget really is the facilities maintenance and operation, and that would also include, like I had mentioned before, we're no different than any organization. We have to pay insurance on our facilities, which is over $200,000 a year. We have our utility bills are close to $500,000, just to kind of give you a sense of, there's a fairly significant portion of the budget that goes to maintaining and also just keeping our buildings open and paying our bills. Transportation's another, a fairly significant cost area, although a small percentage of our overall spending, it is still significant in cost. We do contract out our busing, and both for our in-district and out-of-district students, and busing is a very costly business to run in the state of New York for both insurance purposes and all the regulations around it. So, the companies, we do bid out that service, but it is a fairly significant cost to us and has gone up quite a bit over the years. Again, debt service speaks to the bonds that we issue to do capital work, and that's also a portion of our budget that goes into our spending plan. And then the revenue, we're not, this evening, we're going to get further into how our revenue works and where the sources of that revenue come from, but just in terms of the revenue sources, they're fairly limited. Like I had mentioned earlier, the majority of our resources come from the local community. Over 80% of our budget is funded by our taxpayers. We get a very small amount of state aid. We get a small portion of federal funds. And then we have appropriated fund balance is really the money that we have in our savings account from year to year that we will use to then offset the following year's budget. And other revenues would be things such as sales tax. We get a percentage of the county sales tax. We also do have tuition students for both special and non-special ed programs here. We do get interest revenues, which actually have gone up a bit in the last few years. And just occasionally we'll have some filming that goes on. We run some of our facilities out when it makes sense for us to do so. And we do try, where possible, to increase our revenue sources to help offset some of those costs. But again, being the Hastings, as are most districts in Westchester, we get a very small portion of the state budget. The state formula is based to drive monies to like high needs districts, which is based upon property wealth and also income levels of the residents. So unfortunately, we do not get a great share because they kind of apply a formula to us and mostly driven by the property wealth in the area. So because of that, the majority of our funds do have to come from taxpayer dollars, and that's the challenge. Some districts in New York State upstate New York gets about 70 to 80% of their budgets funded by the state of New York, which makes it a little bit of a different conversation when you're trying to, have a budget voted on, understanding that, people here are really going to feel the direct cost of that budget. So that's just a little graphic.
Any questions about this so far? Anything that we presented so far? Any Facebook chat questions, Janine? Yes.
Are there any long-term trends there in terms of the revenue shares?
Yeah. Proportion changed? Well, they haven't changed in the last 15 years or so, but actually, and I believe it may have been in the early 80s, 29% of the school budget was supported by the state of New York. And I think, not unlike other areas in Westchester, we've seen a big shift in that. And I don't think, based upon the state's budget themselves, I don't think we'll see a big change in that again, because I think as the demographics and the cost of living in the area has gone up, that actually creates the need to get less. The state looks at that and says, well, you're high property wealth, you don't need money from us. So unfortunately, I don't think that'll change anytime soon. The one piece that we're getting a slight increase this year with the sales tax in the county went up, so we will see a portion of that. Unfortunately, I think that's the real challenge for us, and that's kind of what we were trying to demonstrate here that I don't believe that will change. I think, we always hope that the state, even when we get a few more dollars from the state, whether it be a percentage or something more, it's impactful to us. And certainly, we work with our local legislators and work to find ways to drive more money into what we say, like lower Hudson Valley region, and hope that there may be things that can help offset it. But I don't, unfortunately, there's not a lot of things, and that's why we try where we can to get some additional revenues, either with tuition or renting our facilities out.
There's actually, the meetings that, we attend, the major concerns in a state like New York State are the fact that we have the big five in the state. New York City being one of them, where you have a system with over 1 million children with a lot of need. So, it's New York City, Syracuse, Yonkers, Buffalo, Rochester, and one more.
Wait, you said Syracuse, right?
I said Syracuse. There's one more. I never remember the big five.
Is it Buffalo? Did you say Buffalo?
Buffalo was one of them.
Yeah.
We'll remember.
Okay, we'll remember.
We'll remember.
We'll get back.
But they are a big draw in terms of the state funds. They are. And rightfully so. There's a great deal of need there. So that's always going to change, and that's always the challenge when the governor puts forth a budget. You're going to see, you're not going to ever see more. You're not going to see
Actually,
more.
we have to fight for what we get. So I think, to Valerie's point, at least in the probably the last 15 years, if anything, we're always trying to hold on to what we're receiving, because every year the governor has a proposal to either shift, funding away from the high needs districts and try to target it. And it's only with our legislators trying to kind of keep us, whole and not, certainly we don't want it to go in the other direction. But and I don't have any great faith that that'll, shift. To Valerie's point, we do have quite a bit of high needs, and rightfully so, the money does go there. So, and
there are also upstate districts where there's a tremendous amount of need, and where the economy has not bounced back from 2008, they're getting less as well. So there are some real reasons. Not that as I said, we'll always take more money, but we do realize the reality as well.
Exactly.
So class size, and this illustrates a point made earlier, and we spent a lot of time looking at this chart because we don't ever want for example, we don't ever want a kindergarten classroom with 25 children. We don't ever want class sizes that go to that level because it does affect the quality of instruction and learning and our ability to make sure that we're able to ensure student-centered pedagogy and learning, where children are not sitting, but they're up and they're doing hands-on projects, and they're in their book groups, and they're exploring new books. That takes space to do that in elementary school, and that's especially through given that there's a really important addition to the elementary school in Hillside, which is the Balanced Literacy Program. That was courageously put forth by Amy Kazes and supported by our Board of Education, because that's the kind of student-centered learning that builds proficiency and builds stronger readers and writers who also are advocating and looking at ways in which they can promote and build their voice. So all of this is again kind of a representation of our philosophy and our beliefs. And more and more learning does require students to be able to get up, to walk around, to move, to have different spaces and agile furnishings and locations that children can work more comfortably to doing the kind of work that they're doing. This summer we had, for example, we were looking at the balance in the kindergarten classroom, but we were also concerned about what was happening in fourth grade, and so we ended up shifting the numbers of sections, as you can see, in kindergarten to increase the section in fourth grade. Those children are not going to disappear. They're going to head to Farragut. So, and fifth graders. So all of this sort of, wherever there's growth in student enrollment, that does move through the system, and that does make, have an impact on what's happening and the degree to which we might have to make a shift of some sort that requires, a different, not only staffing, but it could require new, additional resources, and materials.
I just wanted to mention, I think the challenge, and we'll be speaking to this as we look at all of our enrollments, small districts, our cut points are very different. I think our capacity for taking in 10 students to grade level are different. Different schools sometimes, we'll be saying, well, our enrollment went up, and it may only look across the system like 2% or 3%, but really where those, if we get 5 to 8 children in a grade level, it really makes us have to look and say, oh, are we running it at 24, 25? And as Valerie mentioned before, we have, and we will continue to do so, hope to bring or keep as many children in the district. So within these numbers too, there may be children that have a variety of needs, whether it be E&L students or children with IEPs. So we're very mindful that sometimes, we also look at the children in the grade level, the cohorts. So it's not always so much as a number. There's a lot of analysis that goes into the class size, and maybe there could be a cohort that having 23 or so may not be as much of an issue based upon the learners in that cohort. So beyond the screen numbers, I know that there's a lot of analysis from our building leaders that go into really looking at the children and making sure that the class sizes are also, for those individual learners, which may look different in one cohort versus the other. So I think just to kind of keep that in mind as we look at this, and it's not, and there's a lot of time and conversation around making those decisions.
And it's interesting. I mean, it's a credit to Hastings. I mean, families are moving here. We just, welcomed a family from the UK, who, closed on their home, and their child will be able to enter the school on January 6th. So that's really a tribute to the community, but it does impact, depending on the grade level of that child, what might happen in that grade level. But it's not the case for this particular child. She's, older, but that, that does happen as well, and we want that to continue because, that contributes to our tax coffers. Yes?
Is there a cutoff though? Is there like a 24?
We don't have a grade policy, a class size policy. We look at national trends. This represents national trends. The teachers, Hastings Teachers Association contract does mention sort of a range. We're below that range. So, and this is also representative of the river towns. So if you look at our neighbors, they're also in the same range. And now Farragut. Again, if you look at the class sizes, the sections that are 1920 are not that different when it comes to the proposed class size of 2021.
Yeah, and the one thing as we look at both the middle school and high school, when you get to the secondary level and things are departmentalized, there is an additional cost. So it's at an elementary K-5, you're really talking about a classroom teacher, but as you get to the 6th through 12th grade, 6 sections of a grade level may actually translate into like a seven teacher FTE. And what I mean by that is it's a block schedule once you hit the 6th grade, and the way that the students are going to different classes, and to Valerie had just kind of just briefly spoke about scheduling and how that impacts. It's not so much, it's not as easy as when they're in K-5 for lack of better words. And there may be some, if we, just as an example, we see this next year 5th grade cohort coming into 5th grade, we can accommodate that with 7 classroom teachers. But as that cohort moves through the system, that may actually increase the staff to address the various, subjects that have to be taught, which aren't always, because of the schedule, work a one-for-one.
Exactly. And certain, plans or designs that might have been, fine maybe 5 years ago in the middle school may no longer serve our children. And we have to think about and shift gears on that. So if, our children are not, for example, if there's a grade, or, who may not be getting, access to core content mathematics every day, but every other day, the research, doesn't support an every other day structure, nor does our data. So we have to make sure we adjust those things that might have been, or plans that might have been fine, before, ESSA, but they're going to be problematic for us, along the way. And so we're committed to making sure that we make those adjustments so that, children can, as I said, have access to different, rigorous courses or electives or, programs that we offer, and not, find a barrier or restriction that prevents them from doing that. And at the high school?
And at the high school, again, very similarly, where, the translation of the sections may be a little bit different. I think Valerie had mentioned before, in addition, you get into the high school, you have not only electives, but we do run our HAS program, and how that translates, those children are represented in the projections here, but what that really, in terms of the staffing that's required to support some of those programs in district, is a little bit, it's more costly, but I think it is a program that we believe in, and although there's a cost to it, there's also a cost to not do things also. And that's not the reason, that's not what drives us to save money, but the reality is we do have an obligation to make sure kids graduate high school, and if you don't, you will end up paying for it either way, but we made decisions to build the capacity here. But in looking at the staffing numbers, and when we go through, and every year we evaluate all the schedules of the staff and the lows, and looking at it within the schedule, sometimes, again, the cohort of the children, you may need additional staff to support those different cohorts within the high school setting.
And then that's when there's a whole range of different courses that children love to take. Ms. Szymanski and I were in a calculus BC class. Now, we didn't know what was going on, but we were there. And the children were thrilled and interested. And you know what? If they are, we should offer it. And all the other types of courses that get children interested, and it gives them some access to passions that they have, and we were in an exciting economics class where the teacher was introducing the children to this whole notion of what it costs to make a Disney T-shirt in Haiti. And what the workers are paid there, as opposed to what it costs us to sort of fuel our insatiable appetite for cute little figures with big ears. But that was an important lesson for the children to learn and be exposed to. And we want our children to be motivated in terms of thinking about the world, right? And so that exposure to social justice and making sure that they're not they're going to go on, they're going to do well, but along the way look around and have sort of look at the sort of globally, what does it mean for children? And I think what's next, what he told Ms. Szymanski and me, was I think they're looking in, the next place that they're exploring is Costa Rica, where baseballs are made, for Major League or all the other places that baseballs are used. But it's the same sort of theory, and children have to wrestle and grapple with those ideas, about what world, what are we living in, and not sort of taking it for granted. So I think that's really awesome. And I think being able to provide that in our curriculum and it's represented through class size is really important.
I have a question just by reading this correctly. When you talk about the public students for different grades every year, and I know that's not grades, 10 kids come over the summer. So if you have 140 ninth graders in 2019, in 2021 they're in 10th grade, you have the same number.
Yeah.
How do you factor in?
So right now, this is for the purposes of tonight. By the time we develop our full budget, we start to really look at, what we typically do is we'll look over the last 5 years, and we do have points of, what I would say, entry points. So we do see typically in our middle school, typically the 6th grade, because I think people either are coming from the city or maybe from Yonkers, and we do we'll typically see some growth in that cohort. So as we're beginning to plan out our staffing and things like that, we'll take a really hard look at the trends for the last 5 years, where in addition to like the traditional kindergarten students that are, we look at the birth rate of that year and some other information to help guide us with that number. We're also meeting with the preschools in town and speaking with them to kind of help us also get a sense of that number, so that by the time we're in the development process now, so if we believe that there will be some influx at those different grade levels, that will trigger the need for additional staffing. We'll look at that as part of our budget process, but that's a good question. And you will see a refinement sometimes of these numbers as we go through the process to reflect those increases.
And then enrollment trends?
Yeah, so this is just an enrollment trend. Interestingly, like if you look, prior to that, when I first came into the district, actually, I was mentioning this to sometimes when people, this one doesn't necessarily show because we could have went back a bit further, but in the late 90s, actually, the enrollment was at a lower point. It was around 12 or 1,300 students. And even over the course of time you'd be working here and you're like, wow, like the budget's got up quite a bit, but Then, as we've seen, we've been fairly consistent from 2007 on. I think this kind of demonstrates, somewhere in around the high 1,600 range is where we've seen our enrollment typically to be without any major development in town. I think all of us, understand that if there were to be something at the waterfront down the road, this may look a little bit different. Right now, the majority of households in Hastings do not have school-age children in them. And where we're different, Dobbs and Hastings are similar in that. So Ardsley and Irvington have more homes with children in it. So if we ever were to see a change in the demographics of Hastings, and again, those demographics have been pretty much the same for 20 years. So many people live here and never had children in the school district. So if in fact there is a chance that some of these numbers could go up, I think it demonstrates though that we're not going down, right? I think, when we talk last year about our space and our needs, and to Valerie's point, also the hopes to bring more of our children that are placed out of district back to the district, that we require space for that. So again, we do keep our eyes on these numbers, and like I had mentioned earlier, when you think about our budget from that late 90s to where we were in 2000, most of it was driven by enrollment growth, which was about 400 students. And again, we're back on the uptrend from the 2014 school year where we were kind of going back down, and especially we're seeing most of that enrollment currently is at Hillside School. So in the 2013-14 year, as that enrollment kind of now has moved through the system, now we're going back up at Hillside, so. All right. Okay, so again, just in a graphical form here, I know I've probably said it too many times today, but our salary and benefits represent 81% of our budget. And again, just kind of gives you a sense of where some of those other kind of items are. So beyond that, everything else is, that's in the green area. And the purple area really is for everything else. I spoke before about, heating the buildings, our insurance, BOCES services, which includes our infrastructure and our technology, our Wi-Fi, all the things that you would think about that would take to run the building, all the books on the shelves, everything you see, all the, chairs we're sitting on this evening, all of that represents about 17%. And then the last 2% is the debt service, which is for the capital improvements that the district has, that district voters have approved for us to borrow money on to either fix something or build something or do some large scale work. That represents 2% of our entire spending. So as you can see, the majority of our spending is driven by salary and benefits, which are driven by our goals and our class size, and that's what more or less is driving the salaries number. And then everything else is just to kind of keep our doors open and stay operational. And we do look to where all of those areas are scrutinized every year, for to see whether we can shave off a bit.
Savings or concessions. And every school district uses more or less, it's not only a zero-based budgeting philosophy or a historical consumption philosophy, it's a hybrid,
yes.
For school districts. Salaries and benefits, those are largely, driven by, making sure that every time, if we get a retirement, at a certain salary, we're not going to hire that person back at that salary.
Mm-hmm.
There are other, the pool of employees, is rich. Hastings has no difficulty attracting new staff members no matter where. And so we're going to try to make sure that we get the best employee, but not pay them at the salary that we just, paid someone who's been in the district for 35 or 40 years. So that's one of the ways in which, the zero-based budgeting, is a component of our salary and benefits. And every district always looks at ways in which, healthcare, since healthcare, just continues to increase in every service industry. Most people may not see, school districts as service industries, but that is what we are. We provide a service, and human beings are the ones that provide the services. So, we are always going to be looking at ways that we can offer, benefits for families, but also make sure that, Maureen will share with you in the next slide, I believe, a way in which we do that through a consortium. And then even within the consortium, Maureen is a very tough negotiator. I've seen this. So, so she is, going, she's relentless in making sure, that she's asking, and what about this and what about that, to kind of get those costs down and keep them down to the extent possible, because that matters a great deal, because then that's not passed on to the taxpayer. The equipment and the contractual services, I mean, we use BOCES. BOCES is the Board of Cooperative Educational Services. It's been in existence since the 50s, I believe. And they exist to make sure that school districts don't have to go out and contract for services alone, which means that we pay more if we go out alone. Going with the BOCES, any number of BOCES, any BOCES in the state, we've used Capital BOCES, which is way up, near the Albany area. We've used Erie BOCES, we've used Suffolk BOCES, Nassau BOCES, Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES, Rockland, Southern Westchester, you name it. We look for ways to share the services of certain, whether it's a professional service or any kind of contract. So we're always looking every year at making sure that we do that. So what did we pay last year? How did we manage that service last year? And how can we, continue to reduce the cost, which then, allows us to do what we need to do. But, again, it doesn't, it helps us to be mindful about passing along those costs to the public.
Yeah, and just to kind of further just give a little bit more information on BOCES. So BOCES was created by the state, and really their sole purpose for existing to assist school districts. And really it is a charge by the governor. A lot of people, you hear a lot about consolidated resources and sharing services, and really BOCES is the model for that. And really we're incentivized to use their service. So when the districts like ours contract services through BOCES, we're actually receive 50% back on the expense in our following school year. So the state has really set it up to really not only incentivize, but kind of, push districts to use that as a resource, because especially a school district like Hastings that's fairly small, like we could not afford to have a lot of the services, and we rely heavily, even our safety and security consultant, we contract his time through BOCES, as does 20 or 40 school districts in Westchester County, and by doing so, you're able to get a really excellent resource at a fraction of a cost, and then also to receive half of it back, because the state really wants to ensure that districts are, when possible, sharing services. So we do take full advantage of that.
Any questions about any of what we just shared?
Okay, so what...
These are bargaining unit contracts.
So all districts, not only, this is not unique to Hastings, we live in a state, unlike some states like Florida and different states that are right-to-work states, we're here, all employees, for the most part, are covered under collective bargaining agreements. Sometimes I think people who are unfamiliar with it, they'll hear Hastings Union-Free School District, and they think that means we do not have unions. All that speaks to is that we're just not part of a centralized school district. It really has nothing to do with our employee group. So these are the different, we'll go through and what each bargaining, each unit is in Hastings and who that contract covers, and we can speak to how that works and how that process is in terms of negotiating with each group. And so we have our Hastings Administrative Association, and that covers our principals, our directors, assistant principals, and assistant directors. So this is really our building-based leadership, including also like athletic director and our special education administrators as well. We have our Hastings Teachers Association, which is by far our largest union. It has close to 200 members that covers, and that's all of the teachers, psychologists, social workers, guidance counselors, and the speech therapists in the district, and that covers that entire group, and that's our largest contract and our largest group of members.
And these two groups of employees participate in the teachers' retirement system. And they're certificated, so they have to hold some kind of certificate from the state of New York in order for them to operate in those roles.
Then we have our clerical CSEA unit, and that also covers, that's our typists, our receptionists, our clerks, our nurses, our teacher aide, and our teacher assistants. And this group is approximately, I think, about 65 members in total. Then we have our custodial unit, which is again also covered under the CSEA. And CSEA is a statewide union that they have different locals, and that's the ones we have here as well. And they include the cleaners, our custodians, our maintenance mechanics, and our grounds workers.
And one thing about the teacher assistants and teacher aides, they are absolutely essential as part of the foundation for being able to bring children back who are placed in other districts. These are children who have IEPs or individualized educational plans. So they play a really, really important role in making sure, that children are, are successful, that they're supporting the needs of the children, and that those needs are, vary, as well as, in order for those, it also enables those children to be able to focus on their learning. So they absolutely are essential and are a component and ingredient for success for a number of our children.
So this is just, again, we're talking very broadly here. So, and I think,
I'm sorry, that was a question.
Yes.
What's the difference between teacher's aide and teacher's assistant?
So a teacher assistant actually has a certificate from the state of New York, and in order to get that, there's certain requirements they have to meet, and some of it is training, and they also have to take a test through locally to to get that certificate. So, and what they're allowed to do in the classroom is slightly different. I think they're very similar up until the point that a teacher assistant can actually instruct, where a teacher aide is really there to support the child and help them, but not necessarily give them direct instruction. They can.
What are the qualifications for teacher's aide?
I mean, I would say that the majority of our teacher aide and teacher assistant, many of our teacher aides, even if they're not functioning as a teacher assistant, actually do hold their certificate. So, depending on when they came into the system, I would say similar to, depending on the needs of the child, and, we typically look for someone who has some type of background in either childcare, or whether it be some type of babysitting, or they could have worked in a childcare situation. And, some people have come up through the system, either who have started in part-time capacity for us, but then through working for us for multiple years grew into, after, we train them, they can, in fact, then assume a teacher aide role, even if they previously didn't have the full experience. So.
And it's, they have to be very adaptive in their roles, because they can have a child who's not mobile to a child who needs to be toileted, and the whole range of children. So these have to be, obviously very caring, dedicated, people who who love the children, and who want to. They see themselves there, and you can, if you look at the longevity of some of our teacher aides in the district, some have been here 40 years.
Yeah, and I think to Valerie's point too, I think when you talk about a teacher aide, a lot of it is based upon their ability to connect with the child, which may not always translate in terms of like a job experience. It could be that they have a very caring way about them, and they're able to, work well with that child and take care of their physical needs as well. Okay. So this we'll get further into. I mean, unfortunately tonight, as we were trying to create something just to kind of give you an overview, we just wanted, I know some people are a little bit more familiar with the way all contracts work. So in our collective bargaining agreements, there are negotiated increases each year, which are like cost of living increases. But in addition to that, teachers move and administrators and the other two bargaining units, they work through a step system or a salary matrix. And what that means is there's a negotiated salary matrix for these different bargaining units, and different schedules based upon the role that you play in the district. And so even if there was not a cost of living increase, there's a salary schedule that exists that has been, not unlike all school districts that exist, that gives a guaranteed raise. Even, it doesn't even have to be renegotiated. The person, just by coming and being at work the following year, would in fact receive between, depending on where they are in the step schedule, and this is just a broad range, and this is really what exists for us, either between a 1.86 to a 4.82% percentage increase on their salary, without even talking about their cost of living raise. And that has to do with being, you get credit for having years in the district, and longevity and different.
Education.
Yes, education. So there's, depending, we can get further into what that means. Every salary group and every contract's a bit different, but overall, just to kind of demonstrate that we do have collective bargaining agreements, some of which we do renegotiate, but much of which is been in place for multiple years, not unlike, we're not unlike every other school district, and we do have to negotiate these things in good faith. And that is basically built-in increases that we are required to, again, address each year in our budgeting process. So, and then it just kind of gives you a sense of, as we are looking, and like Valerie said, it's not per se zero-based budgeting, because, it is in a sense that if you
retire.
Or if you retire, but we already start our year off with some level of increases that we have to address in our budget.
They're historical.
That are both historical, and then our ongoing negotiations that happen every 3 years with different units. At that time, we do negotiate cost of living increases. And I just want to also frame that I think there's times, and I understand people say, well, why did you have to give this and that? The one thing in New York, beyond the fact that negotiating good faith means that you don't go and say you're not getting a raise, because we've seen it, and it has almost happened here, that if you come to an impasse and you don't agree to a salary, outside board will come in and negotiate a salary and basically tell the district what that salary increase will be. And one thing we do know with Hastings, we have wonderful teachers. I think we have we have fair, good bargaining agreements with all of our staff, but we certainly are we're on the lower quartile of Westchester County contracts and salary. Now, it's a great place to work, and I think our employees understand that, and they're willing to take, when I say, some of it could be not a significant amount less, but if we were to, we also do have to pay people for fair market value, and there's not only a responsibility to do so, a legal requirement to do so. So as we talk about trying to build a sustainable organization, we are constantly talking to our bargaining units and expressing that. And I think they do understand, and they try to work with us to try to, come up with things that we can, kind of both sides can, work with.
And what Maureen and I are going to work on is getting someone from the bargaining house, clearing house, which is the bargaining units, actually come together, and they discuss trends in their contracts. And so we're going to try to get the gentleman who does that work across the state to come in, or of course the region, to come in and just talk about some trends, some global trends, which will further, support what Maureen described. That those are, if no bargaining unit is going to give up anything in their contract unless there is a give back from management. It just does not happen anywhere. And so the notion that we have any kind of flexibility at all, is really not something that we can state with any degree of sort of security. We go into those, obviously looking at ways that we can keep costs down, but at the same time, we certainly don't want to ever disrespect those folks who are tasked with educating our children, but wherever we can look to kind of make sure that we are not sort of exploding the compensation, but that we're being respectful and we're honoring regional trends. So we hope that we'll be able to get that person to come in.
Yeah, I think it just gives you it gives a context, because as we mentioned before, this is the largest part, and when we talk about contracts, that also covers the employee benefits such as health insurance. Of course, ERS are not in the bargaining unit. That's just a requirement by the state to pay into the pension system for these groups, but all the other benefits are covered in that, and we can kind of give you a sense as we talk through it, and we'll get to the health insurance side, and that'll kind of demonstrate. I'll give you some information on that. We can go there. Wow, that's so funny. It shifted, Valerie, right? It didn't look like that.
No.
Okay, so.
Well, when at the end of this presentation, we'll go back and make some adjustments so it actually turned out like that.
Yeah, okay. So just on our health insurance, I had listed on here from 2011-12 through our current day increases. And as you can see, can you see the first year on there? Okay. So in 2011-12, we are seeing large scale increases in our health insurance. Thankfully, the last few years, so let me speak to the health insurance that we participate in. So we are part of a consortium, and it is made up of all the districts in Lower Westchester. So years ago, the district was in the statewide plan, which again is a larger consortium, but the feeling was that we were lacking a lot of local control, and although the majority of state employees are in that consortium, the decision was made by a group of Westchester districts that they felt as though, and also insurance is also affected by like trends in insurance and overall costs. And we felt as though some things that were happening at the state, that the costs were kind of like a runaway train. So the decision was made to start our own local health insurance consortium. But part of the mandate of starting that consortium was that it at no point could ever exceed the New York State, it's called NISHIP actually, statewide plan, which is, like I said, covers the majority of state workers in the state of New York. And if it were to, like, say, for a second consecutive year exceed what that rate would be, then it would dissolve, and then we would need to go back into that. So I think when the inception of that, which was probably about 25 years ago, we have found, I mean, I think over the course for Hastings alone, it would be in the millions and millions of dollars, in which we saved by leaving the New York State plan. But in terms of, just to demonstrate that we wanted to make sure that, in fact, we are being really thoughtful about, our benefits. Probably about 6 years ago or so, I actually issued an RFP, a request for proposal, for other insurance plans to kind of quote in what we needed to do, because by union contract, it can't be a lesser of a plan. So it means that it would have to have the same level of benefits and coverage that our current plan does, and that's dictated by our contractor. And again, that's something that is golden to people. People will not take a raise. They're not going to give up their health insurance or get a lesser plan. And in doing so, the good part of that practice, although it was a big process, was that we actually found out that our current plan really wasn't, when I say a lot cheaper than, we looked at Aetna, we looked at all the large companies came in, they did give us quotes to say if we were to replace this plan in kind, what the cost would be to the district, and it was at least 25% more than our current plan. So although our current plan is costly, when you look at the overall dollar amount, in comparison to the majority of health plans, it is, and it's about $27,000 a year per family plan. Our employees, depending on the bargaining unit they're in, they pay up to not quite 20%, but teachers pay 16.5% toward the cost of that plan each year. But we do know, as I think a lot of people, and speaking to different people, health insurance it's actually just gone up in cost the last few years with the change and even the requirement for people to take out health insurance. And the other piece that kind of did ding us a bit, where we were, prior to the change in the Obamacare, we weren't required to give everybody health insurance. We have a reporting, you talk about mandates, that's the worst mandate. We have to report out on everybody's hours here to make sure that we're offering everybody health insurance. It's a federal requirement. Most people know you're working at a 1095 safe from your employer. And really what that means is that we're reporting out everybody's hours here, so they're ensuring that we're covering all our employees. So in the past, where we could have maybe a part-time employee or a substitute, if they now work over a certain amount of time consistently, we're required, it's not even a negotiated benefit, we have to give them health insurance or we take a huge IRS penalty. So much of this is, again, outside of our control, but I can tell you that the health care that we currently have is actually, in comparison to the majority of private health care plans in New York State, it's a lot cheaper than that. And we do always try to partner with our employees and hoping that they can also contribute additional to that. And we have made a big piece of our healthcare cost is our retirement. We pay for our retirees. So there's a portion, I think in our current year's budget, about $2 million of our health insurance costs are not for current employees, they're for retired employees. And even when they're Medicare eligible, that we still pay for their secondary care. So as people are living longer, I mean, that's something that it's not unique to Hastings. This is something that it's a trend throughout the state, and I think many people, including private businesses, healthcare is a large ticket item. The last couple years, the concern is we've made some changes to the plan, and again, talking about local control, where we will increase our co-pays to try to keep that overall cost. So meaning employees have in good faith taken higher co-pays in this insurance to try to keep those year-to-year increases down. But again, we're slated to at least have a similar increase to last year. So again, on a $6 million ticket item, 5 or 6% is a big increase for us to handle year-to-year. So,
and whenever contracts are renegotiated, that's an area where we do try to incentivize the bargaining units to add additional contributions for newer employees, so employees who are not here. that are going to be future employees, that's where districts also try to, and increase the contribution for healthcare.
And you really can, and we have done it, like Valerie had mentioned, that's a big trend you'll see, because typically people, in order to kind of keep what they have, they'll tier it out for newer employees. But groups such as some of our other bargaining units that don't make as high salaries as others, we talked about the teacher aides before. The teacher aides, based upon their salary, we can only get a certain percentage of healthcare, because again, it's tied to the Obamacare, and there's a minimum contribution people can make. So a lot of it is some of our ability to negotiate on some of the other bargaining units outside the teachers and admin there's a ceiling, because if once you go and then it's considered unaffordable health care, so then we would also take a penalty. So it's challenging, and I think but we want to make sure that our employees are well covered. And
Do you want pension?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this one now the increases aren't here. This is like they shared it with my sheets. Okay, so I wonder if you click again, do you think it'll come in or no? Oh no, okay, we'll go back. So again, the pension costs, and specifically here I'm going to speak to the TRS. So as Valerie had mentioned before, this really covers the majority of our employees. It actually includes teacher assistants are considered in this category as well. So it's the pension cost based upon, this percentage represents the percentage of a person's salary we have to pay the state every year toward their retirement system contribution. So as you can see, these numbers really, since after the crash, we've seen these numbers really be on the higher end. I mean, for many years, the good old days in the 90s, these numbers were below 2-3%, and actually there was an all-time low of, because I remember when we got the rate that year, I'm like, is this a typo? It was 0.36, 1/3% in 2001, 2002. And that's on your total salaries.
That's never going to happen again.
It's never going to happen. It's just I just love to look at that year and think about that rate. But since then, we've seen the high was in 14, 15 in the last, say, 10 years or so, and we paid almost 18% to this. So if you have $30 million worth of salaries, you're paying 18% of that to the state is part of your budget in that year. Or you paid actually in the following year, but you have to budget that expense in that year. So like Valerie had mentioned, the one thing that was a great news for this year's budget, for the 1920 budget, we actually saw that rate go down for the first time. And, at that rate, it was 8.86%. So that really was very helpful when we were crafting the budget this year, because just that drop from the previous year had saved the district roughly $300,000. So that was helpful when we were, trying to make decisions around the budget, because usually things don't go down, they typically go up. Unfortunately, now that rate slated for the 2021 school year is slated to go back up. And again, this is all based on the stock market and how well the funds are performing, and they use a 5-year rolling average. Now, one of the drivers for the state is that there was a lot of money the state was also receiving from settlements, from the Wall Street settlements, and as those amounts have dropped off, it's based on like the state's economy and different kind of factors that are, again, completely out of our control. But not only we're required to pay this, we have no option. And this is the employer's contribution. Employees also pay into this system. So it's not those numbers, but they pay a percentage of their salary.
And the one big sort of help, talk about that one.
The new tiers?
That and the TRS reserve.
Yes, okay. So there's two things. So one of the things, that, at least at the state level, that they did a few years ago, and it may be a slightly short-sighted, there's different tiers in the retirement system, and each tier represents benefits that an employee would receive if they were hired within that time frame when that tier existed, and they can't change those benefits. All they can do is create new tiers with a different type of benefit for retirees. So after, again, after 2007, I think the state and districts were looking for some relief. They were like, we can't continue to fund these, the benefits that retirees would receive as being a tier 4 person really, were almost unsustainable. And so the state got together and they created what was at first a tier 5, and it reduced the amount of benefits. So in other words, it does help. So these are actually averages. If those new tiers didn't exist, these numbers would be higher, because as new people come in the system, what they're going to receive in retirement is going to be a lower number. The one piece that'll be challenging is when the economy starts doing better, sometimes it makes it a little bit harder, because I think a lot of the reasons people come into education is they know they have that benefit later. So we'll see how that pans out long-term, but I can say that we definitely have seen some relief, and although those numbers are high, I think that's why some of those numbers have started to come down, because as half of the employees are in that new system, it helps like massage that number down by the fact that the benefits that they will have to be paid ultimately are lower. So
and they pay more over time.
Yes.
They contribute to the TRS
yes.
system for a longer period of time. I think Tier
Yes, yeah.
6 is for a very long
yeah,
time.
and it's based upon, and they're also capped.
They
in
cap the
terms of-
salary, or which is commensurate to the governor's salary. So those are the ways that overall the existing employees across the state, are that the contribution to the by the districts is managed a bit better. That coupled with the TRS reserve.
So one of the things that the governor actually signed into place last year was the ability for districts to help manage those ups and downs in the costs of the district when you may have a year to be able to offset some money. So they allowed us to create a reserve. So what a reserve really allows you to do is, if you had, last year we had a few $100,000 left over, because the rate was coming down, and we felt as though we had some additional monies in our budget at the conclusion of our fiscal year. And what we were able to do with the creation, or the ability to save for pension obligations in the future, if the rate were to go back up, we were allowed to put $300,000 in that savings account. So if we see a fluctuation in that rate in the coming, like next year or so, we can then take that money out and say, okay, to kind of help smooth that on a year-to-year cost, it allows us to kind of help manage those peaks a little bit better. So, you're not always going to have money to put in the savings, but in the times where you do, and it allows you to it's helpful when then if the rate goes back up, we're able to kind of pull some money out of the savings to address those increases.
And that's pretty significant because, prior to not having a TRS reserve, I mean, depending on where you were, whatever that rate was, if your contribution, ended up being, 14%, the last year, maybe it was 9%, and the following year it's 14%, that's a pretty significant amount of money that, in a 2% tax cap environment for a district to recover. And that usually results in a reduction in the workforce. That's a very serious situation. So this is probably one of the most challenging parts of this whole construct that we have absolutely no control over. ERS is more stable. That's the employee retirement system for the non-certificated employees. But this one has been a wild card, and it has, depending on your year and what's going on, it can be a pretty, disruptive force. There's a question.
So how many reserve funds does the district have?
We have, let me think, I have the number of them, I'll name them this way, I have them right in front of me. We have a tax certiorari reserve, which is to repayment of tax grievances. We have an ERS reserve, which was legally allowed about 8 years ago because the state needed it. They don't have teachers, but they have ERS. So we do have a reserve for that. We have a TRS reserve. We have a small debt service reserve, which goes to repaying debt. We have a repair reserve and a capital reserve.
Would you say they're all at a healthy level right now?
I think, if you ask me, I always want more money in them, but I'm sure, because of course, I think it's always something that is part of our conversation as we speak about the budget. I think, we're constantly looking at them and evaluating them and being thoughtful about how we're spending them, our hopes to be able to put some money back. So I would say that, it could be at a healthy level, this year, but of course, some of it could be out of our control, but I think, the hope would be we're very thoughtful about how much we're taking out at any particular time. So, it's hard because when you have too much, you're faulted for it, and when you have too little, and it's trying to run that balance. So I think I would always love to have more money in it, although I'm happy to have what we have in there, but I'm just also remind us always to be thoughtful about, dipping into it. For those things. I mean, the one good thing that I think the tax cert has served us really well in the district And that's really to repay when people have a tax grievance. Many districts just don't even reserve for it, and they just borrow debt to pay those back. And I think we've been able to successfully pay all of our tax certiorari grievances over the last 10 years without issuing debt. And I mean, I think we really do try to be thoughtful and keep those reserves to where we can actively address for the upcoming, 4 to 5 years, any obligations we see.
Because anything that's, not managed well there, again, ends up, resulting in the potential reduction of the workforce. I mean, so any miscalculation, not having money to draw out of those reserves, we cannot levy more than, we're allowed to by law. So it really is a very important, balance, and, Maureen does a really splendid job at making sure that happens.
Yeah. But it is something, and as we talk through these other sessions, we'll speak about that, and we'll speak about, when we get into our revenue side of our budget, about, how we're using it, when we're taking money out of those retirement reserves, and, being mindful not to take out too much, because, if you take out too much one year, then it just puts you in a greater hole the next year. So I think even the last year, I know, Steve, you've kind of pretty active in the budget, so you know that we actually reduced the amount of money we used to offset the budget last year in our fund balance, and we talked a lot about it. We're like, we have to start, not putting so much toward balancing just the operational budget. So that was a large conversation that started last year. I think we'll be thinking really thoughtfully about it this year as well, as we, see where our needs may be. So that's a good question, and it's a continuing conversation.
And the board looks at all of this, so they're thinking as well and trying to make sure that, all decisions are, made at a level where, we're as thoughtful as we can about the future, but, every district is different, and, but I can tell you there's a lot of, deliberation that goes into these decisions, that these are not made, sort of, rashly or without a lot of, sort of back and forth. At the end of the day, I think, certainly from Maureen would know, she's been here a long time, she would know that the levels at which these have been, supplied have been helpful to the district.
Right. And I think it's challenging for all districts, because in a tax cap environment, it's difficult sometimes to be able to put money back into those reserves. But I think it's always the balance in which you don't want to hold on to too many dollars either. So it's constantly looking at it each year and trying to make some, best decision making, because I think it's a fine balance, because to Valerie's point, if, as much as we want to hold on to reserves, if we're doing it and then we're going to cut 3 staff members, like, is that, then there are times that we may decide to take a little bit more out. So it's a very, it depends upon a lot of factors. That's when some years when we're like really tight, we're like, we have to take more money out of the reserve, because the last year we were in a good spot because that TRS went down. So we were like, this is a good year not to use as much reserves, because we had a decrease there. So it was kind of, the timing was right to say, you know what, we don't need to take out that much. We need to not take out that much this year, because this is not, we're not going to be able to replenish it. So we'll be that'll be part of our budget discussion this year.
So that concludes the sort of basics that we wanted to provide for you for this session. On December 9th, we'll have probably, we're looking at what exactly it is that we need to follow up on, but it may be that we go into, bargaining agreements and
probably like revenues
and tax caps, those items. And then we'll do a deeper dive into actual budgets, so that you can actually see what each budget manager, which would mean every administrator, building principal, director, are responsible for, and curriculum instruction, and all the areas of that, that fund and or are necessary for, the operation of the school district. And then we go into, at our board meetings in February, our first budget presentation to the Board of Education as we move forward to that sort of final budget adoption by the board, and then the budget vote in May. So we hope you come out for these, bring your friends, and we hope, most importantly, that this was, useful background, basic information. Any questions? Anything that anyone would be interested in us including, we could
if there's
Yeah.
any items that you think we could add to future.
Send us an email.
Yeah.
We'll be happy to consider them and make sure that we address them in the upcoming presentations. So thank you so much for coming. Have a happy Thanksgiving.